The franchise tag deadline is today, and the Vikings aren't expected to use it on Sam Darnold. Are they making a mistake, and what happens now? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we are always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. It is Town Hall Tuesday. That means I'm taking your questions, and you can confess your hottest takes to me, and this is where I will talk about them under the guise of anonymity. I will protect your identity, but I won't protect your take. So if you want to throw me a hot take at any point, just the scorching one that's so scorching you're embarrassed by it, I want it. I'm so interested in it. So please, there's a Google form in the show notes. If you bookmarked the question Google form, the link has changed. So rebookmark it. It's going to be in the description to any episode from here on out, any episode of the podcast, wherever you listen, it's in the description. So send me either questions or confess your hot takes. The hot takes will be later in the show. But first, you guys have a lot of questions about Sam Darnold. So here's the deal. Late on Monday night, Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, Tom Pelissero all came out at the same time with their pre-written pieces about how the Vikings are not going to tag Sam Darnold, which puts a lot of the combine reporting in an interesting light because they had like pre-written pieces. They knew for some time and they spoke to the contrary, which I don't know. I'm the way that NFL media behaves in these situations is not becoming of like honest journalism, like the kind of honest journalism you would expect from like an investigative reporter, right? Truly team mouthpieces saying what the team wanted them to say or what the agent wanted them to say. And once you understand that, all the confusing things that happen during these times of like heavy reporting, like the combine and the owners meeting and the Super Bowl and all that, all start to make a lot more sense that you're hearing different things because you're hearing from different people. Even it's different people speaking through the conduits that are, Schefter and Rappaport and all those guys. But now everybody's on the same page. The Vikings are not going to tag Sam Darnold unless something super surprising happens. By the time you listen to this, the deadline will be approaching or maybe even past, and it'll be over. All this tag and trade stuff is over. So two main questions that a lot of people had are what happens now and are they making a mistake? So the first Town Hall Tuesday question I will take comes from somebody who's probably not Kevin, who asks, wouldn't it be front office malpractice if the Vikings don't tag Darnold and trade him to get draft picks? Even if it's a fourth rounder this year, that's better than getting a hypothetical late third next year. Kwesi needs to at least try to get that value when we have no draft picks this year. So a late third versus a late third next year versus a fourth this year, depending on the like analytics nerd you talk to, not necessarily might be equal. Maybe even you'd rather have the late third, depending on how you devalue picks a year later. So I'm not sure your premise is correct, but I also think it's on the high end of what they could get. They're not like people are like, there are questions in this mailbag that are like, but couldn't they get a first or a second? No, they can't get a first or a second. Get that dream out of your mind. That's not possible. And the reason that's not possible has been, I've been talking about for a long time. We'll get to other stuff about this, but the idea Kwesi needs to get value. Well, in my opinion, the best value is on the compensatory market. And the question of will they actually get a comp pick is one I'll get to in a sec, but that's where I'm at there. They are going to get more via the comp formula than they would for the piddly little fifth rounder that they're going to get if they tried to do the tag and trade. So why not do that? Why not try, right? Why not try to see where that market is at? Well, you're risking getting super screwed. There is risk to this. I think people are seeing this as like free money that the Vikings are declining for no reason. Kwesi knows that draft picks are good. Even if you hate him, you probably can admit that he understands that you want more picks. And even there was an Alec Lewis kind of combine wrap-up note sheet kind of thing that said that, like, yeah, they don't really like that they have 4 picks and they're trying to do something about it, whether that's adding more next year through the compensatory formula and really trying to play the comp formula. I mean, they signed Daniel Jones and put him on the roster for 1 week specifically to help them in the compensatory formula. And that move may be the difference between getting a comp pick or not for Sam Darnold. So like they are clearly have a plan there. Okay. They're not just shooting in the dark. But I want you to imagine a scenario that's not too far-fetched to me. Let's say the Vikings apply the tag to Darnold. Let's say they change their minds between the time I'm recording this and the deadline. Let's say they do it. And so that's 41 mil. That counts against the Vikings cap. He doesn't get it until he signs the deal, but the Vikings have to have that money set aside so they can't throw it around in free agency. So next week is free agency and tampering and all that stuff, and the Vikings have 40 mil less to spend, right? But Sam Darnold doesn't sign it because he knows through all the conversations he and his agent had at the combine that he gets a better deal for a team that doesn't have to spend a pick to trade for him, right? A team's going to give, if a team's going to give up a 4th round pick to get Sam Darnold, well, they're going to be a little less willing to give him more money versus if he gets to be on the market and bidding all these teams against each other with none of the complication of also what the draft pick is and the Vikings also trying to get teams to bid against each other. He doesn't want that. So he's like, I'm not going to sign your deal. I'm not going to sign your tag. I'm going to hold out. That doesn't sound like that crazy of a thing for him to do. He holds a lot of cards right now because the Vikings can't participate in free agency until they offload that 41 mil. And Sam Darnold, Andrew Kramer has said this, and essentially it gives him a no trade clause so he gets to pick his destination because he doesn't have to sign that franchise tag until he's happy with the contract offer the other team gives him. So it gives him the power to completely throw a wrench in this. And it gives potential suitor teams the power to completely throw a wrench in this as well. Hey, Sam, don't sign the tag. Because eventually the Vikings are going to blink. They're going to give up. They're going to rescind their tag. You get to walk. We get to do our thing forever. And the Vikings just wasted a whole bunch of crucial free agency time. You would be going insane if an hour of tampering passed and we heard, well, the Vikings aren't going to do anything really today because they're waiting for the Sam Darnold situation to clear up. You would go absolutely nuts every time a team signed a guard. You don't want that. And I've been trying to say for like 3 weeks that logistically really hard to pull off like a tag and trade, turn right around, do it like they did with Matt Castle a bunch of years ago. So there's a reason this doesn't happen all the time. And apparently the Vikings see it the same way I do. It's just not worth the risk. And you might not even get a better draft pick out of it anyways. Teams are going to pay a lot of money for Sam Darnold, whether they trade for him or not. Teams are not going to be very inclined to throw a draft pick on top of that just because. They're not going to give you a 1st round pick for the privilege of paying a 1-year wonder quarterback $40 million. They're just not going to do that. If you think that that's like there's a 1st round pick just ripe sitting on the tree and Kwesi refuses to pick it, you do not understand the market. And you have to rethink how other teams are going to think about this situation. Nate Walton asks, I see that this upcoming draft, the Vikings are not eligible for a compensatory draft pick for Danielle Hunter. However, they are getting one for Kirk Cousins. I seem to recall you mentioning it had something to do with void year stuff. Can you explain this to us? Yeah. Okay. So comp pick formula, contracts that void out do not qualify for a comp pick if they void out like before the phrase is maximum possible term. But basically, if you sign somebody for a 5-year deal, they have to play for 5 years of that deal. If you do like void year stuff to cut it early, you cut them early. If you added void years to the end of it to do cap crap, but they still play the 5 years, you're good. So Danielle Hunter did count toward the compensatory formula. He got canceled out by another signing. And that is the real thing is, do the Vikings get a comp pick for Sam Darnold? Will they actually get it? Well, adding Daniel Jones to the possible market helps, although they might even keep him, which will remove their need to sign somebody, a different quarterback for $10 million, which would take a comp pick off for them. But the way to track this is for compensatory free agents, there's going to be like a minimum amount of that contract for them to count. And it's going to be like 4 or 5 mil. So like significant free agents. If they take in more than they lose, they don't get a comp pick. If they lose more than they take in, they get a comp pick. So think about, well, like you got to watch where Cam Robinson ends up, where Danielle Hunter ends up, where Sam Darnold ends up. Where Aaron Jones ends up if he doesn't come back to the Vikings, Byron Murphy if he doesn't come back to the Vikings. There's a lot of departing free agents that will count toward the compensatory formula. All the contracts that are voiding out will count toward the compensatory formula. They all reached their maximum possible term. It was just void years on the end for cap stuff. So they'll all count for comp picks, and the Vikings watch if their signings count for comp picks. Darius Slay just got released. If the Vikings decide to do a Stephon Gilmore thing with him, He won't count toward the comp formula. He was cut before the end of his deal. He doesn't count. I think that answered just about everybody else's questions, but Kwesi's getting a lot of heat right now for not trying to do something that would be kind of insane to try. And I feel like I don't know. I feel like I just want to get it out there how I feel about this and why I think we all need to maybe relax a little bit. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout any game. So even if you miss like the NBA tip-off or the face-off, if you're doing it on an NHL game or the first pitch of a baseball game, you can stay in the action. You probably are going to get the same lines, even if you miss the tip-off by 2 seconds. Just do it as a live bet. It's kind of the same thing. Or you can put a whole bunch of stuff together into a same-game parlay. So that way you've got a whole bunch of action going on throughout the entire game. FanDuel's live betting feature keeps every moment of the game exciting. If it's a 30-point blowout, you can bet on if there's going to be a comeback. Not even if there's going to be a full comeback that means the team fully came back and won, but hey, maybe they're going to close this lead and make it look better by 15 points. You can bet on that. Right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Moving right along with the Town Hall Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. So I didn't read a lot of your questions, but I think I answered them in that little rant about how this works on the cap and how it would have worked if they did the thing, but they're not doing the thing. So Don H has a question about this that says, if Darnold ends up hitting free agency, which he asked this before the Rappaport report came out. So yeah, we're here now. Is this another blemish on Kwesi's resume in your mind? I know not every scenario can be viewed as analogous, but that would mean Kirk, Daniil, and Darnold all leave that without same year draft comp. That's what happens when contracts expire. Yeah, I don't see why that would be a blemish at all. I mean, okay, with Kirk, I agreed with it. With Daniil, I did not agree with it. With Darnold, I agree with it. Okay, so he's 2 for 3 on those, in my opinion. But it's more about that player and whether or not you want to extend them. But he's not losing years of team control. No resources were spent. It's like being mad that they don't have Myles Garrett under contract. Like, that'd be nice, but they didn't spend anything on Myles Garrett. It's a 0 for 0 transaction. I think the framing of that question views players in-house as an asset after those players' contracts expire. But if you have a player you like and you say, we're going to buy 4 years of your services, and you pay them for those 4 years, and then those services expire and that's it, everybody just made a deal and you walked away. So no, I don't think that's a blemish on Kwesi's resume at all. In fact, I think the things that Kwesi has done between the months of like February and March are where he has been one of the best, if not the best, in the league. I mean, look at the free agency. Look at the way that he piloted the franchise out of the Kirk quagmire and all of the contract stuff that Rick Spielman had. The Vikings have done an unbelievable job of not only getting out from under all of those cap burdens that everyone was so mad about, but without really missing a beat and sort of becoming proof positive that you can void year forever and then get out of it whenever you want. And it's like, fine. They had 1 year where they didn't make the playoffs, and that was a year where they're starting court with like half. They started like a whole month of Nick Mullins. Like, of course they weren't going to do it there. That had nothing to do with the cap. Similarly, another person who is not Kevin asks, what does Kwesi need to do to improve the narrative about him? As the other GMs across the league who are bad at their jobs get gassed up and talked about like they're good. Meanwhile, Vikings media and non-Vikings media alike trash Kwesi when all he's done is successfully execute the competitive rebuild like he said he would and win multiple 13+ win seasons in 3 years. Fire Kevin O'Connell. O'Connell's getting all the credit. That's what's happening. And that might not be all that fair. But the other thing is we have seen enough information to evaluate one draft, and that draft is bad. We have not seen enough information to evaluate anybody, maybe Jordan Addison, if you want to do it after 2 years and you want to feel good about him. For me, I'm pretty comfortable doing that, but I would respect it if you say, hey, let's wait 3 years and do the whole thing. But I'm pretty sure Addison is good. So the other draft capital from that was acquiring TJ Hawkinson, which was fantastic, and Mekhi Blackman, who we've only seen 1 year out of, so we say jury's out. And of course, the jury's out on the 2024 class. So we've got a lot of juries out. We've got miss on Scene, miss on Booth, I'm going to go neutral on Ingram. He wasn't a good starter, but he was a starter. Certainly better than a lot of people get out of their second years. We'll go with a miss on Asamoah. So we'll call it, 1/2 out of 4 on the 2022 class. Bad draft. Can't do it. They changed a bunch of things, and that's really crucial. They changed a bunch of things. They changed their scouting staff. They changed the structure. Kwesi changed his idea of how much he leans on other people. He got more experience. A lot has changed since that 2022 draft. Then you're going, we'll call it 2.5 out of 3 if we want to say jury's out on Mekhi Blackmon, but we are good with Addison and Hockenson, right? So 2.5 out of 3, and then who knows about the 2024 class. So I don't know. It looks like they had a problem and they fixed it. But for Kwesi to improve the narrative, I think you need to see a draft class really get nailed. He needs to get credit for Jordan Addison. I have no idea why he doesn't. And you need people to stop crediting Kevin O'Connell when the team is good. When the team is good, it's O'Connell. When the team is bad, it's Kwesi. And I'm going to be honest, there's some preconceived biases that I think affect people. And I'm not necessarily talking about race. I think analytics has a lot to do with it. He is the nerd GM, and people want the nerd GM to fail. Especially old school football people, which populate a lot of NFL media, want the new wave to fail because it threatens them. And I see it everywhere. They want him to fail because he nerded out. But I don't think that he's even doing, like, what he's doing isn't, his first draft pick was a safety. And that's like not a thing that analytics people want you to do. And he traded he traded both draft capital and money for a tight end. That's like very anti-analytics. A lot of the best things he has done have been not like the Twitter analytics way to go, but he still gets that reputation as this like Poindexter that doesn't really know the sport, that's invading our big man time. And then there's a race component. I'm sorry, there is. You can't tell me that there isn't a race component. I have seen people call him a DEI hire like instantly. Like, I'm sorry, like it's there. Okay, this one actually might be Kevin. Speaking of things that some of my listeners got really mad about, Chris Cluey mentioned on the podcast about how teams draft focus on offense or defense can affect special teams, like the Raiders drafting for speed, and that affects the kind of punter you want. Based off of that, what type of punter should the Vikings be looking for? I want to be really conservative with punter. I don't need distance at all. I want hang time. I want to force a bunch of fair catches. Here's the deal. For gunners, we have Najee Thompson. I think this one is Kevin because it's special teams. That's why I think this one's really Kevin. And I know that Kevin is going to agree with me on Najee Thompson, okay? He's coming off the ACL. He's still a good gunner. Bring back Trent Sherfield if you want. You got a good gunner. If you think you can do better, sure. But I think you can feel like as long as you don't make the gunners' jobs really hard, you can do it. And those guys aren't like the top-end speed track star types that Dan Chisena were. You want to give them some time to fight, to get open, to get into the open field, but not make them tackle. That's what I think the Vikings have in a gunner. They can get down the field, but I don't want to make them tackle. So I want to punt everything up in the air, and if that means I lose 10 yards of field position, I'm okay with that in return for never actually giving up a punt return. A 55-yard punt with a 15-yard return is the same as a 40-yard punt, but the 40-yard punt had less risk on it. I'm taking that choice. Jordan Larson asks, if you were going to build a team from scratch, what non-quarterback current player would you build around? Non-quarterback, I'm a trenches guy. It's a left tackle. Probably Tristan Wirfs. If you wanted to be a homer and tell me Christian Darrisaw, I wouldn't argue with you. But it's probably Tristan Wirfs. I think that blindside protector, build out trenches first and go. If you wanted to say like Myles Garrett too, if you wanted to go the other side, I'm probably pretty amenable to that. But yeah, I'll go with the tackle. JJP asks, how likely is it that the Vikings bring back Byron Murphy and sign either DJ Reed or Travarius Ward? I was like, Cam Ward. They did meet with Cam Ward in the draft, by the way. That's a weird one. Due diligence, right? Or sometimes you're just like asking about Miami. Maybe there's somebody else in Miami they're interested in and they're asking about. Anyways, personally, I would love this, but is it realistically likely? Yeah, it is. I actually think necessary to get Byron Murphy. So if you bring back Byron Murphy, what does your cornerback room look like? You got Byron Murphy, Mekhi Blackmon, and who else is even playing? You don't really have anybody else unless you got Nudie McGlothern and like penciled in as a starter. I don't think so. So there has to be somebody else. Now that somebody else can be a big guy like DJ Reed, a big name like DJ Reed, or a smaller name out there like maybe Darius Slay, who's probably not going to command a ton of money at age 34. But it's got to be somebody. But the Vikings have a bunch of money and a huge need at corner. And having a serious cornerback room is, I think, the biggest way that they can take the defense from what they were last year, which was very good, but exploitable by the right kind of team, to just a very good, very difficult to exploit defense that's consistent week to week. I think corners are the best way to do that. So it's realistic for sure. It's one of many ways the Vikings can skin a cat in free agency, but they've got a lot of resources and free agency is going to be big, but they're going to do a lot. Get your notifications on. Next up, I've got a bunch of questions I'm saving for later, by the way. I took too many, but so I'm going to do that. And then we're going to go move on to your hot takes under the guise of anonymity, your unpopular opinions. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. All right, time for some hot takes on the Locked On Vikings podcast. This is where I want you to confess your darkest sins to me, okay? The opinion you have that you can't put out there because you know you're going to get flamed for it. I'll take the flame. I'll take the heat, okay? I'll keep you anonymous. I'll protect you, but you need to confide in me. And some of these are hot, and some of these are, warm. An NFL fan says, JJ McCarthy plays better than Sam does next season, and the team improves talent-wise, but doesn't get to 10 wins. So under these premises, JJ McCarthy better than Sam. Okay. It's a take. I don't know how hot it is. It's like, we don't know how good he is, right? So any number of outcomes can happen. And the team improves talent-wise, sure, but doesn't get to 10 wins. So you're essentially kind of saying the Vikings will regress in luck. And the Vikings, I think, were above average lucky, but not crazy, unless you think of DPI as lucky. But I think that's a factor of the physicality that teams wanted to play Addison and Jefferson with. It was like a side effect of that. So I do think it's sustainable, and kind of maybe even going to get worse, because that's that was the best way teams had to stymie the Vikings offense, was to play those guys physical and eat a flag every once in a while. I mean, look at the way the Lions played. Have played the Vikings for 2 years. They haven't beaten the Lions in 1,000 days. So everybody's just going to start copying that. So if they don't get to 10 wins, I think they do have to just become unlucky, which is a little bit like betting on the coin toss. It's not a guaranteed loss, but I don't think that's a value play. Having Cake says, so some of you just said your first name. It's supposed to be anonymous. You got to Dear Abby this, come up with a name. So I'm coming up with one for you. You're Having Cake. And you say, so I've heard a lot of people want Aaron Jones back for 1 year, $7 million. Wouldn't it be better to sign Cam Akers to 2 years, $3 million a year and draft a running back? A lukewarm take, I would say. I think a lot of people agree with you. Personally, I say, why not both? I think you can absolutely just do both things here. And then your room would be Aaron Jones, Cam Akers, Ty Chandler, and a rookie. Pick 3. Cut one of them and then you're good to go, right? Like a day 3 late round rookie. And then either cut him or Chandler and then you're happy. Probably a Snowberg says Kyler Murray will be the Vikings starting QB in 2027. Now we're talking. Okay, that's the kind of scorcher I want to hear on this kind of segment. The circumstances that lead to that would be insane. Kyler Murray's contract, that's about when it expires, right? Okay, it expires in 2028. So, but he's got no guarantees left after 2026. So I do think, at least as it is right now, but in March of 2026, his 2027 salary, he's got rolling guarantees, so they will become guaranteed well before he would get cut. So this would probably be a trade situation. He would be 30 by then, and this would be the Cardinals running out of patience. Sure, that seems as likely as anything. But also, that would be JJ McCarthy's 4th year on his deal. So he would be this would be a Ponder style JJ McCarthy bust. And Kyler Murray is your Matt Castle coming in 2014 to take him out and to start instead of him. Nota Real Taki, go ahead and type that out, you'll get it, says the Bryants should trade Brian O'Neill before he turns 30 and starts to decline. Oh my God, now we're getting somewhere. Here's the deal. Everybody is going to want this. This take will not be hot by the time Brian O'Neill is 30. Everyone's going to be is he a cut candidate for the rest of his career? Specifically because he turns 30, there will be no other logic behind it, and I'm going to be really annoyed by that. So everybody get ready for that. But I think the problem is if this is your deal, right? You want to trade Brian O'Neill before he turns 30. He's played for the Vikings. This will be his 8th year. So the best a draft pick can ever turn out for you, if you employ this and you want to get rid of everybody before they're 30, is then nobody can play like more than 7 or 8 years before you want to get rid of them. And you're just not going to hit on enough draft picks over the aggregate to continue replacing people. You got to have, if you have a guy, you got to have them until they decline. And anticipating that someone is going to decline just because they turned 30 is a much worse system than what the teams actually have, which is speed tracking data. So they're going to know when he's starting to get old. And so the Vikings should trade Brian O'Neill before he gets old is probably something that they agree with. Before he turns 30 is just a bad way to measure it. They have data, chip data, that's going to tell them when he starts to slow down and how much they can put on him, and when they start to have to start giving him veteran rest days and all that old guy stuff. But a declined Brian O'Neill is still probably a starting quality player anyways, so you still probably want to be bought into that, even if you're overpaying for it. It's probably better than cutting him and like trying to throw in a rookie and getting a TJ Clemmings in there, right? Like it's still a reasonable player. And wherever that is, they're going to have a much better idea from their end with all the data they have than we are going to be able to put together just by saying, well, once you're over 30, you're old and you got to go. Dr. Claw says, winter whiteout uniforms should be worn for every December home game, not just one. I don't think I can go here with you. The winter whiteouts, I think with distance from it, I find them underwhelming. It's a fun idea. The winter whiteout is a fun idea. I cannot get over that they're an indoor team doing a winter whiteout and they have to fake the snow, and that they can't do the white end zones because teams complained. I can't do it. The aesthetic just will never quite be a complete thought to me. And the jerseys themselves just kind of look like the Arizona Cardinals, like stock home or stock road uniforms. And therefore they come off a little bit boring to me. Go Beavs says Brandel will be the best rated guard on the Vikings O-line in 2025. He'll have a year of starting experience and will have Darrisaw back to make up for his mistakes. The Vikings will also only get 1 yard in free agency or the draft. So the second part is not hot at all. I actually think that's probably the stock expectation. They get one guard, or one starting guard. I don't think they're going to replace multiple interior offensive linemen. They could. My jaw wouldn't hit the floor if they did more than that. But my guess is they're going to replace one interior offensive lineman, and Bradbury and Ingram are the two who are on contract years. Brandel still has 2 years left on his deal. He ain't getting replaced. Sorry, everybody. Not happening. So they'll, only get one in free agency or the draft, probably to replace Ingram, and then like the one they actually benched, and move on from there. Brandel being the best rated guard on the O-line, you have to say like best rated interior O-line. And even that I don't think is all that hot. You know, like I think there's a world where, if he has a year of experience more at the position and Darrisaw stays healthy and makes him look better, that tends to pump up things like a PFF grade, which is probably what you're measuring this by. And, second year on that, plus those same metrics tend to hate Garrett Bradbury, and the new guy might be a rookie, right? Like, I think this is perfectly reasonable. I think you got to get hotter. Just Watch says NFL media at large is harming the sport by becoming all about engagement bait and fantasy football / gambling. First time? Look, I have complicated thoughts on this. But I grew up with fantasy dominating the sport. It always dominated the sport. I remember when they first introduced NFL Sunday Ticket, the point of it was you would like enter your fantasy team, and it would have like a sidebar that you could like go around and see when your fantasy players were in the red zone. This was before NFL Red Zone was a thing. I was like a kid. So fantasy has always driven this, and I think gambling is just a more direct version of fantasy, where you have a stake in a player's stats rather than the outcome of the game. And that incongruity makes for some really weird analysis. So I get it. But me personally, there are gambling ads on Locked On Vikings, right? That I read. And I am an enthusiastic participant in sports gambling. I love it. I have a lot of fun with it. I think you have a responsibility to be responsible with that, but just like any vice, drinking, smoking, whatever, it's not on the commercial. I don't think. I think it's kind of on you and the public services if we really want to get in there. But I think it's on like communities, right? And it's just there is a responsibility to be smart about it. And there are PSAs, hey, don't bet more than you've all seen Kurt Warner tell you not to chase your losses and all that. That's good advice. Listen to Kurt Warner. But I think it's always been like this, and gambling is just maybe more annoying about it. And so it's more visible. So we're noticing it more, but it's always been like this. McCarthy Hayes, this is the last one I'm going to do, says the future is the brightest it's been for this team since before Kirk. The best wide receiver in the NFL and an elite left tackle are both under contract for the next 4 years. This is the first time since 2019 that they don't need to fill edge 2 in free agency because of Dallas Turner, who showed promise. By the way, NFC executives elsewhere, according to the Alec Lewis combine notebook, agree. They're like, oh yeah, Dallas Turner, he's looking great. He's poised for a breakout. That's the way that the NFC sees Dallas Turner, poised for a breakout. They finally have a good young rookie QB to build around. There's no need to panic about the trenches or how the Vikings only have 4 draft picks when the front office has plenty of resources to make the team better and free agency hasn't even started. This is not a hot take. You're just cooking. You're just right. There's nothing hot about that. That's just the truth, baby. Cook, McCarthy Hayes. All right. I will talk to you all tomorrow. If any surprises happen, we'll talk about that. Otherwise, we'll start to really look at free agency in earnest. We only have a couple more shows before things actually start going on. So we'll kind of recap what the options are and where the Vikings go from here. I'll see you all next time. And as always, Skull.